Hi everyone, welcome back to Algebra 2 Easy. Today we are talking about graphing trig functions. Before we get started, we should probably break down just a few details about trig functions in general. Sine and cosine functions are referred to as periodic functions, and that's because they have a regular interval that keeps repeating, so they flow like a wave. Periodic functions, aka trig functions, have two main pieces that we're going to be focusing on today, and that is the period and the amplitude. Now, the period describes the length of one cycle. So basically, from beginning to end, how long does it take for one full complete cycle? Amplitude is going to be the distance from the midline to the maximum or minimum point. So here's what we're going to focus on. We have f of x equals a sine of bx. Now, a is the amplitude. So when we want to know what is the distance from the midline to the highest point or from the midline to the lowest point, we're going to take the absolute value of a, and that is always the number in front of the function. For the period, you need to know that to complete one full cycle is 2 pi. But if there is a number attached to x, we are going to take 2 pi and divide by the absolute value of that number. It really helps to make a table in a situation like this. It helps take the guesswork out of all of it. So let's do our first example. We're going to start with just the traditional sine function. So f of x is equal to sine of x. First, let's identify what our a and b values are. So the number in front of the function is your a value. So in this case, a is 1. B is the value attached to the x, and clearly there's nothing here, so we're going to assume it too is a 1. Now, based on those numbers, the amplitude is going to be the absolute value of a. So the amplitude here, the absolute value of 1 is 1. Now the period, we're going to have to do a little bit of math here. 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. So in this case, it is simply 2 pi. So I'm going to highlight those. My amplitude is 1. My period is 2 pi, meaning it's going to take from 0 to 2 pi to complete one full cycle, one full wave. Let's go to our table. Now, you may be asking yourself, how do I know which x values to choose? I have a little tip for you. When making a table, your first x value is going to be 0, okay? So we're going to plug in 0, but you may be asking yourself, what other numbers am I going to plug in? And I just need 4 more values. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the period you just found, so 2 pi, and we're going to divide by 4. The 2 and the 4 simplify, and we're left with pi over 2. So that tells me I'm going to count by pi over 2 units. So my x values are going to change by pi over 2. So let's go over to our table, and out to the side, we're doing a little bit of work. So this was 0. Add pi over 2, we get pi over 2. That's 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2. So quite literally, I have 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. So I have 4 pi over 2s, which is what we wanted. So now we can simplify those if we need to. Pi over 2 doesn't simplify. What about 2 pi over 2? Well, that becomes just pi. 3 pi over 2 doesn't simplify. And 4 pi over 2 becomes 2 pi. Now we have the best angle measures that we could want for graphing sine of x. All right, so now it's just a matter of plugging this into your function. This is why knowing the unit circle is so helpful and just memorizing that first quadrant. So for instance, now we want to know what is sine of 0. Well, sine of 0 is 0. Okay, now we want to know what is sine of pi over 2. So think that's 90 degrees. Sine of pi over 2 is 1. Now we're going to do the same thing, sine of pi. Sine of pi is back to 0. Next, sine of 3 pi over 2, which is -1. And you could always go back and have your unit circle sitting out there next to you, helping you make sure you have these numbers accurate. At some point, it's going to become second nature, and you're just going to know these values. Sine of 2 pi, back to 0. Starting with 0, 0, it's going to be right here. All right, now we have pi over 2 and 1. You may be asking yourself, where is pi over 2? Well, if this is 0 and this is pi, and we want half of pi, pi over 2 is going to be right in the middle of that. So we want pi over 2 and then up 1, pi 0, and then 3 pi over 2, -1. And again, pi and 2 pi, think about your unit circle, right? Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2 are right in the middle. So 3 pi over 2, -1 is going to be right here. And then we have 2 pi right there. What you have now is a sine function, aka a wave. Let's try one more for tonight. F of x is equal to sine of 2x. All right, let's go ahead and figure out what is my a value. And remember, a is the number in front of sine. In this case, it's a 1. B is the number attached to the x. So in this case, it's a 2. Let's figure out our amplitude, the absolute value of 1, which is 1. And then for period, if you remember, we're going to take 2 pi and divide by the absolute value of b. So 2 pi divided by 2 is going to be pi. All right, so we have our amplitude and we have our period. If you remember, we're going to start at 0. We always start at 0. But to figure out my other angle measures, we are going to take the period and divide by 4. Now, there's no simplifying this time, so pi over 4 represents the intervals we want to count by. So we're going to start at 0. 0 plus pi over 4. So remember, this is just 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4. I'm going to simplify these if I can. Pi over 4 stays the same. 2 pi over 4 becomes pi over 2. 3 pi over 4 stays the same. And then 4 pi over 4 becomes pi. So these are the numbers we're going to plug into our function here. Let's start with sine of 2 times 0. So you're going to multiply first and then evaluate. So this is sine of 0. Well, sine of 0 is 0. Let's try the next one. Sine of 2 times pi over 4. All right, well, that's going to give me sine of pi over 2. And what is sine of pi over 2? It is 1. Let's keep going. Sine of 2 times pi over 2. Well, that is going to give me sine of pi. And sine of pi is 0. Next, sine of 2 times 3 pi over 4. That can simplify to sine of 3 pi over 2, which is -1. And then last but not least, we have sine of 2 times pi. That's an easy one. That just gives me 2 pi. And sine of 2 pi is 0. All right, so let's start with 0, 0. All right, I'm not exactly sure where pi over 4 is, so I'm going to skip it for now. I know where pi over 2 is, so let's go there. Pi over 2 is right in the middle of 0 and pi. And then, again, not quite sure where 3 pi over 4 is, but I'm going to go ahead and graph pi 0. So I graphed all the ones that I knew. I knew where this one was, this one, and this one. Now, pi over 4 has to be in the middle of 0 and pi over 2. So right in the middle is going to be here. That is my pi over 4. And we're going to go up 1 unit. And likewise, 3 pi over 4 is in the middle of pi over 2 and pi. So right in the middle is here, and we're going to go down to -1. So we're going to go down 1 unit. And look at that. You have your sine function. It looks just like the one we previously graphed. It's just more condensed. Last time the period was 2 pi. So from beginning to end, I had more room. When the period is a smaller value, we still have to have the exact same shape, but in less room. So it makes it squishier. All right, guys, I'll be back tomorrow to help you with cosine. Have a great night.